Carlos Collazo reporting live from the draft combine. Give us the lowdown, man.
Yeah, this is the fourth annual edition of the Draft Combine out here in Phoenix. Fortunately, we are indoors, so the heat isn't too bad. But this year, there is a decent amount of prospects at this event. 80 of our top 100 are at least at the Combine. Whether or not these players are on the field is another question. One of the biggest benefits that teams get from this event is just the meetings they can have. So in the suites around me, in the suite level here at Chase, all throughout the day, teams are having meetings with their priority targets, getting to know them on the makeup side, kind of picking their brain on how they view the game, just what they're like as players. And then right now behind me, you got outfield drills going on. We watched BP early this morning. We'll get some bullpens. So it's a really good chance to see the depth of the class and for the teams to spend a lot of quality time meeting and talking to a lot of these prospects.
Yeah, I love that. I know, sometimes that can be the difference maker too, JJ, is those interviews and those conversations. So I can't believe it's already year 4 of the combine. Before we dig into anything else, what have been your thoughts on how this has played out, and has it been a real positive for the scouting world?
Yeah, I think that the scouting world probably there's this kind of the duality of it, right? As an event, it's always going to be tough because there's not a whole lot of incentive for the absolute top players. Some of the top players who are going to get drafted are playing right now in Omaha, and that's a better stage for seeing who are going to be the best draftees than a combine. So I don't think it's ever going to be the NFL draft combine, but for a scouting perspective, this is great because this is bringing many of the top players all together. You can get psychological interviews, you can get medical, you can get all these things that you want to get done, want to get knocked out. Really, the things, let's be honest, that are the more valuable part of the NFL draft combine as well. Like, I know it's a show and who ran the fastest 40, but those are kind of things that nowadays are less important because they have player tracking. They have ways of knowing how fast a player is on the field. So those things are less important, but the off the field components are as valuable now, if not more.
Okay, so let's get into specifics. Carlos, who is there? Who should we be talking about?
Yeah, I think three of the most exciting players who are here on the field who've actually looked pretty good already today. It's high school shortstops. It's my favorite demographic. That's just such a fun player group. But Kellen Lindsay, the Florida shortstop, he's probably the most high profile, the highest ranked player who has got on the field. His infield that he did at shortstop was phenomenal. All the teams got a chance to see his great actions. He was a very early riser in Florida. One of the most impressive Florida prospects in a class that's really not great for Florida high school, which is a bit unusual for that state. And then you go up to New Jersey, and Luke Dickerson is a shortstop who, over the last month or so, has been a massive riser. Getting a chance to see him hit in a big league field with Wood has been impressive. He's a standout hockey player as well, but the swing looked good. Got to see him move around the field. And then maybe the most impressive player for me so far today is Tyler Bell, who is a high school shortstop out of Illinois, switch hitter. He showed surprising pop with the left-handed bat with Wood, more than I was expecting to see. And then maybe one of the better defensive performances in the in and out session. So those three have been particularly impressive. Mike Sirota is in the background now, throwing. I think he already just did his outfield throwing, actually, but he was a player who entering the year was a potential top 10 rounder. The stock has fallen a bit, and it's maybe looking more like second. But I'd say those are the guys that are most exciting so far for me.
You mentioned earlier, JJ Weatherholt's there. He's not going to go on the field, but he is there. And that leads me to kind of ask because we rolled out a new mock. You rolled out a new mock late last week. And I think probably the headline of that is you had Weatherholt at number 1. Is that like because you're changing it up, or is there some smoke there that Weatherholt might really be a guy who could end up going 1-1?
Yeah, I would not put him there if there was not real smoke to it. I think it is interesting just to work through some scenarios in the draft, but I'm not going to just make up a scenario. That's one that over the last week or so, when I was talking with more people, it came up again and again, actually. I still think Cleveland has a wider net at number 1 than most people expect. I think from the outside looking in, it's a Travis Bazana or Charlie Condon show, which we do have those guys at the top of the board, but there's really not a ton of separation from a lot of these college players. JJ Weatherholt might have both the best swing in the class, the best pure hitting ability, and also he's like the only player in this top 10 range who can fit at shortstop. So there's a good chance that he's just as talented as these players we're talking about. He has dealt with a hamstring injury both last summer and last spring that maybe make the profile a little bit riskier, but it's a profile that also fits with exactly what the Guardians have done. And from Weatherholt's perspective, if they think he's got a chance to fit 5 to 8 on the board realistically, and he can take a haircut at number 1, lock in more bonus pool, more slot value than he would get in those lower picks, then Cleveland gets a player who they view as maybe similar or just as good as all these players at the top, and they can spread their pool around. So I also want to caution that like an underslot deal at one is not necessarily Cleveland just being cheap. They are going to spend all their money in the draft. It's just a matter of how they're going to allocate those funds.
You mentioned Weatherholt's injury. That kind of leads to the follow-up question I have, which is, do you think if he'd have been healthy all year, that he might have been just in that 1-1 conversation even more so all year? Like, we are talking about the guy who was the D1 batting champ last year. This guy does have a pretty hefty track record of production, a pretty hefty track record of hitting. He just missed some time early this year.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, and I think he really would be in this top tier of players more consistently. Because again, he was number one entering the spring. He was moving over to shortstop. Everyone was really excited to see how he's going to play defensively at that position. He just missed about a month and a half, but since he's been healthy, he's been exactly the player scouts have expected. He's hit really well. He takes a great approach to the plate. He uses all fields. He's got power. He runs well when healthy. And the shortstop defense, by everyone that I've talked to, has been solid. So he's not this sort of elite shortstop defender. But in this class, in terms of a separating defensive profile, just having a chance to play shortstop with that pure hitting ability and power and track record, like you were mentioning with JJ Weatherholt, I think is enough to get it done. It's just tough when you're missing a month and a half and guys like Charlie Condon and Travis Bazana are hitting nukes left and right, setting modern day records. So statistically this year, it's not impressive, but I think his profile has not really changed. And maybe depending on how you view him defensively, it's only improved this year. So I would certainly view him near the very top of the class.
We have a fan question we'll get to in the chat in just a second. If there's any others throughout the show, we'll do our best to mix them in here about any topic, obviously draft, but also later on about prospect, college game, etc., College World Series, all that. So one quick follow-up here for you, Carlos. We've had a long period of time now with slot money as part of the draft. Do you feel like front offices have enough data now to say, hey, we feel as if these players are similar enough that we can save some money here and spend it later on? I feel this is a bigger picture topic for our sport, where you have some gunslinger GMs who specify a player and don't believe that two players are necessarily so similar that it's not worth going all out for one, if I'm making sense here. When you have the rare opportunity to pick so high in a draft, if behind the scenes you say, this is the guy I'm banking on, shouldn't that be the top priority? I feel like fans have a hard time digesting saving money at the top of the draft, not for a team being cheap, but just for going for it when, that one player could make all of the difference for your franchise.
Yeah, I think there are differing opinions on how to do this. There are plenty of scouting directors that I've talked to in the past week who view it kind of like you said initially. If they view their guy, they think this is the best player available on the board. They just want to take that guy and move on and be done with it. And I think in general, that's the best strategy to employ. I do think that it is true, though, if you have a similar tier of players and you think the differences are just marginal and the confidence level in your scouting department is maybe not extreme one way or the other. And there's some players who are making a case for player A or player B. In that scenario, I think it can make sense to see like, okay, is one player willing to take $1 million less slot than the other? And is the $1 million difference in their talent based on how we expect it to be worth it? I think that is a trickier conversation. It just depends on really how the class is playing out. And I think another factor that we might have to talk about for this draft specifically is slot values have moved up about 9% year over year. And I know there are a lot of teams that are kind of looking at those slot values and wondering, hey, this is a significant jump in the expected bonuses for these players, while the class that we're looking at is less talented than a year ago. I mean, the slot value for 1-1 is $10.5 million. Is someone really going to break Paul Skeen's bonus record by $1.3 million this year? I wouldn't really bank on that. And so I would expect a lot of underslot deals in the first round. Last year, a majority of the deals in the first round were underslot. So it's definitely an interesting topic. Maybe it can get a little bit too in the weeds for the financials. But ultimately, if you think there's a player who's clearly the best on your board, I think you just draft that player and figure out the bonus and move down your board.
Okay, let's get to some fan questions now. We'll do some later on too. I see they're starting to flood in. Pint size. What have you thought of Conrad Kaysen playing in the field, Carlos?
Yeah, we just saw him take in and out a little bit ago. Actually, he's a great athlete. I think he's a really fluid mover, very twitchy. in the box, it was pretty twitchy as well. So I like the hands. I like how everything moves. I think he's got a chance to play a premium defensive position, whether that's shortstop, whether that's second base. I'm sure he can run around the outfield and look good too. So he's looked pretty solid so far out here. And that tracks with what I've seen of him in the past as well.
Okay, JJ, we got another one that you can take. Here it is. Brandon Dillman. If there's one thing we know for sure about the draft, it's that one of the players the O's draft will eventually be the number one prospect in baseball. Oh, more of a comment on that one first.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. There was another Dillman question also that was asking about the Guardians where had to be tempted to take Burns at 1-1, knowing he could help them this year. And I just wanted to make the point that while it sounds great, we saw this last year with Paul Skeens. We saw this last year with Rhett Lauder. You know, like the problem with pitchers is that a pitcher has already been ramped up. A starting pitcher has already been ramped up since January, and probably is going to be ramped down, especially in the case of a guy like Burns. He's not going to pitch for a significant period of time here, basically a month. And so when you have a situation like that, teams get really leery about ramping a guy back up to then pitch high leverage, high impact, the biggest innings of their life up to then. So I think it's much more likely. Yeah, go ahead, Carlos.
I was just going to say the Guardians have also been a team that doesn't activate many of their players at all after the draft since the draft date has moved back. So that ramp up, ramp down period for pitchers is a great point. And I think even last year, I don't know if Cleveland activated anyone after the draft.
Yeah, good call. Okay. Carlos, we appreciate the time. Now you can have some fun and get back to the combine. Lastly, before you jump out, is there food around? Like, do they feed these guys well? And do you get in on any of that? Right. I mean, if you're at a combine, you really want to eat, some prime fuel.
I have not found the player food yet. I could certainly go on the hunt for that. We've got some snacks, some bars, some chips up here in the media suites section, but I know there's got to be better food down behind the dugout somewhere. I'll be on the lookout for that.
Okay, good. Maybe we'll talk about it next week and see what you find. Have fun out there, dude. Good to see you. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Take care.